I want to welcome everybody. Obviously, the questions of public health are percolating on the call, and we have some really interesting conversation to be had about cross-fertilization here between the United States and Israel and the rest of the world. First of all, I want to welcome, obviously, Mark Ziski and Ariel Zwang. We're pleased to have them. Ted Comet, of course, we're always delighted to have you. Dr. Sherry Glied, the health economist and the dean of the Wagner School of Public Service at NYU, our hometown university. For me, at least, Dr. Gary Freed, a professor at the University of Michigan, where he chairs the department, is the associate chair of the Department of Pediatrics. Of course, our very own Dr. Michael Hartal, our executive director, Dr. Keri Warshawsky, our director of external relations. Importantly for today, Dr. Bruce Rosen, MJB Systems Research Group Leader, Dr. Michal Laron, MJB Health Research Team Leader, and members of our professional staff who are here, and we appreciate everything that you do every day. We're going to have a peek into the work of the Institute as a leader in promoting cross-national exchange in health and social services in all areas, really, of MJB's research and consulting. Today, we're going to look at the question of health policy, a question which is on no one's mind right now. And for now, I'd like to welcome MJB Systems Research Group Leader and the Director of the Smokler Center for Health Policy, Dr. Bruce Rosen, who will give us an overview of the subject and facilitate the presentation. And then when we're done, I'd be happy to take questions. Obviously, Bruce and his colleagues will answer them, and I'm happy to moderate. So look forward to, Bruce, to your presentation, and you'll introduce your colleagues.
So Jodi, thank you so much. For policy analysts around the world, whether they're in Israel, or the US, the UK, or elsewhere, one of the most important things they can do to help policy move forward is to look to other countries or other states for insights and ideas. And that's because all countries and all states face common challenges. In healthcare, for example, we all want the health systems to provide high quality of care, to be equitable and accessible to all groups, and to control costs. Now, of course, different countries and different states will respond to those challenges differently. And that's great, because then you get more things in play, more ideas, more approaches in play. Some of those approaches will turn out to be not so great, but some will be really effective. And a subset of those might be transferable across states or even across countries. So cross-national learning is really important for everybody. For example, in the US, I know that some of you are from the great state of Virginia. And I'm sure that your leaders look also to North Carolina, Maryland, to look for ideas and think, gee, well, they're different from us, but maybe some of those ideas, if we tweak them the right way, could work for us as well. And in Israel, we don't have states, so we need to look at other countries. And our neighboring countries, well, they're different from us. The relations aren't always as good as between Virginia and North Carolina. So we often look a little bit further afield to the US, the UK, Europe, other countries. So we're a very small country. We don't have enough variation within our own country to learn from. We need to look elsewhere. And this cross-national exchange is also important for Israel in another way. Israel is often a pioneer in lots of things, and we're a very innovative country. So this cross-national exchange also enables Israel not only to learn from others, but to share with others. And that's very important for Israel's standing in the world, and it's also important for global health. In today's session, we want to highlight 3 ways which MJB promotes cross-national learning in health. First, we're going to talk about a very special team of international health policy experts who are engaged with MJB in Israel on a long-term basis and are really helping us in very deep ways. Then we'll hear about how our own health policy team uses international research and policy networks to help bring ideas from other countries to Israel. And we'll wrap up with talking about how we use journal publication and Zoom meetings to facilitate sharing of experience with scholars and Jewish communities in the US and Israel. We're first going to hear from Gary Fried, who is the chair of our health advisory team. In addition to being a professor at the University of Michigan and his work as a clinician, Gary was also the founder and leader of the world's largest center for pediatric health services research. Over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Bruce. And I want to tell you a little bit about our committee. Bruce has done a remarkable job in forming this committee and also in helping us to populate it with a broad expertise of individuals that really complement the work of the Smokler Center. The expertise of the committee is in a few different arenas. I think first and most importantly is in research design and methods, so that there is a intellectual exchange that goes on with the researchers at Brookdale in terms of standards and rigor to make sure that the work that's done or to assist in the work that's done is the most rigorous and possible with regard to modern research design and methods. In addition, there's also a lot of content expertise. And again, this is part of the wisdom of Bruce in putting this together, where there's a variety of expertise in health policy, health economics, healthcare systems, data validity, reliability, the elderly, and pediatrics. And the committee itself is made up of some really, honestly, quite high-powered people in America, as Bruce talked about, who are deans like Sherry Glied, who's on this call, people who are department chairs, former government officials, current government officials, chairs of government advisory committees, and leaders in a variety of fields tied to healthcare policy, healthcare systems, and health delivery, so that the exchanges with the Brookdale staff are current and up to date and relevant. And I also want to highlight that this committee isn't just a bunch of eggheads, but they're actually people who have a tremendous commitment both to MJB and to Israel. The committee meets twice a year, once in America and once in Israel, and people voluntarily give up their time for both of those meetings. The members of our committee are also regularly called upon by staff at Brookdale to assist in project consultation, arrange visits or meetings of Brookdale staff with government officials or other academics, either in the US or the UK, and also to take on rather substantive roles when needed in mentorship of Brookdale staff, so that there's a real honest to God commitment of these folks to the success of the Institute and to Israel itself. And one of the main attractions for the people on this committee is the nature of the research that Brookdale conducts. There's no question that Brookdale is a policy-focused research center. And that's what makes it fun for those of us on the committee, that we know that the research that Brookdale is doing has the potential to make a real difference in Israel's society and to impact policy. And that way members feel like they're actually contributing to projects that have a tangible relationship to the people of Israel and that they have a chance to really make a difference. So it's a wonderful partnership of the members of our committee with the professional staff at Brookdale. Thank you.
Gary, thanks so much. We'll now hear from Sherry Glied, a distinguished health economist and dean of the Wagner School at NYU. In addition to her roles in academia, Sherry has extensive experience in the world of policymaking. She served in the Obama administration as Assistant Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. Please, Sherry.
Thank you. So I have to say, first of all, thank you very much to Bruce for inviting me to speak today and also for engaging me in this health advisory team. It's actually one of the highlights of my year to come to Israel and meet with the team and to have our meetings in New York as well. I think one of the things, just touching on something that Gary also said, the field of health policy is a pretty small field, right? There's not that many people who do it in any country. And that is certainly true in Israel, where the group of people who are doing health policy research is pretty limited. It is really useful to them and of course to us as well to have outside experts come in and be able to talk not only about methods, not only about sort of substance, but just an ear, what are you doing? What problems are you having in the research that you're doing? How can we provide some insight and guidance and just a sounding board for the researchers who are at Brookdale. And it's just a natural consequence of this being a pretty small field in a small country, that having those external connections can be, I think, very helpful to the researchers at Brookdale. Some of whom actually come over and visit. We've had a couple visit at Wagner, which has been a real treat as well. So there is that kind of exchange that I think is really important on the research front. A second way I think that we learn a lot, and I think we are helpful to the group, is the very close connection between Brookdale and the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance in developing the structure of the Israeli healthcare system. So the Brookdale researchers have access to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance that is at least as good as I had when I was a Senate confirmed assistant secretary in the US. You could actually, their ability to make a difference in Israeli policymaking is very granular. They're really in there with the staff. They deal with questions that are not only sort of the big picture, how do we design our healthcare system, but what are we going to do about the way that we do risk adjustment of health plans? What are we going to do as we roll out our mental health reform on the ground in real time? And I think having the team, the international team, English, American researchers come in and sort of back up the people at Brookdale and serve as kind of an expert panel for them gives credibility to the Brookdale researchers that is very important to them. We learn a lot because we get to watch how the sausage is actually made in real time in Israel. But that, I think, is a second dimension of the interaction that is pretty unique. It's very unusual to have a research center, a policy research center, that is as engaged in policymaking as Brookdale is. And then I'd say the third thing that we really bring to the group is our own connections within our own communities in the United States and so on. This shows up when Bruce writes to me to say, can you help me find a reviewer for a paper? But it also shows up when one of the Brookdale staffers is working on a project and would like to talk to an expert in that area. It might not be somebody who's on our team, but we can make that connection and facilitate it. I just want to close by saying it really is a wonderful learning experience for me to engage with these super bright, super committed researchers at Brookdale, and to have the opportunity to learn about the structure of the Israeli healthcare system and to contribute to it.
Thanks, Sherry. Before we move along, I want to just share with you that, as you may recall, before COVID, we used to come to the States and to New York for board meetings. Remember those days? And we would bring with us the head of the health ministry, and we would organize for him study visits to interesting places. And he'd always say to me, can we go to visit Sherry Glied? I have an issue I want to confer with her on. So she was at Columbia, then we'd get on the train and we'd go to Sherry and he'd spell it out for 10 minutes and Sherry would say, well, what about this? It was amazing. And we hope to reinstate that. I also want to acknowledge two other health committee members who are with us on the call. We have Stuart Altman from Brandeis, who for over 5 decades has been a senior advisor to presidents from Republican and Democratic parties in the field of health, and Raphael Wittenberg from the London School of Economics, a leading expert on the economics of long-term care. So thank you all for joining us. I'll now turn to our leader of our health team, Dr. Michal Laron, to talk about how she and her team use networks to move policy ahead.
There's one other committee member on the call. Nice, Fiona Sim.
Hi, Fiona.
Is also on the call.
Fiona is also from the UK, a leading public health professional and a major player in the Jewish Medical Association in the UK. Okay, Michal, over to you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I entered the health policy team on March 2020 together with the pandemic, and didn't have the chance yet to meet the committee in person. So I hope to see you soon. As Bruce mentioned, health systems around the world are diverse in terms of their structure, the way services are financed and provide, the national and personal health spending, and more. Nevertheless, there are challenges that most OECD countries face to various degrees of success. Therefore, in our research and advisory work for the government of Israel, we try to examine the Israeli health system in a broader context. International reviews enable us to identify best practices in other countries to help the Israeli health system meet current and future challenges, such as the aging of our population. I'd like to give 3 examples which demonstrate my team's involvement and contribution regarding learning from other countries and taking part in international forums. First, we have a permanent representative in a research network called the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. The observatory is a partnership that brings together different policy perspectives and use comparative analysis of European health systems and trends to support and promote evidence-informed policymaking. The observatory includes researchers from 55 countries in Europe and elsewhere, including from US and Canada. Among the researchers is Dr. Ruth Weitzberg from MJB's health policy team, who is Israel's representative at the observatory. In the observatory's annual conference, researchers present pre-proposals and invite other researchers to collaborate. Usually, the added value of these research projects is that it brings together experiences from a broad range of countries, allowing mutual learning. Brookdale takes advantages of this research network for many studies. One of them started 2 years ago, when we received a request from the Israeli Ministry of Health to examine the medical residents' working hours due to their massive workload. Following that request, we distributed a questionnaire among experts from 14 different countries for a cross-country comparison of regulations and actual working hours of residents. In return, we received standardized and comparable data supported by great literature, such as laws, amendments, government regulations, and etc. If not for this cooperation, reaching the data, especially in non-English speaking countries, would have been quite an obstacle. Through this review, we have made available to the Ministry of Health information that was needed, and we have articulated recommendations to policy development based on successful models of relevance to Israel, and they are seriously being considered. In addition to joint studies with observatory researchers, we also conduct international benchmarking based on rapid response reviews of the professional literature and comparative data. For example, when the Israeli government considered whether to tax sweetened drinks, maybe you've heard about it in the news, I don't know, various types of similar taxes had already been administered in other countries. Israel's Ministry of Finance asked us to perform a rapid response review, which would provide data regarding the extent of sweetened drinks consumptions in Israel and in the world, a review of the economic theory behind taxation of unhealthy food, and review of the influence of such taxation on the consumption volumes of sweetened drinks. We completed the review in just 2 months and delivered it on schedule to the Israeli government just before the issue was brought before the Knesset. One last example is our contribution to a review of the Ministry of Health's latest strategic policy paper, which includes an analysis of the main trends that are expected to influence the health system of the coming decade. This includes demographic changes, aging, trends in morbidity, changes in technology, and more. The Ministry of Health asked my team to review the policy paper and add in missing data, notes, and references. We divided the chapters of the policy paper among the researchers on our team based on each researcher's specialty. After rigorous examination, we added the necessary information and sent the ministry an updated version of the original policy paper, and the Ministry of Health was highly satisfied with our contribution. To sum up, Information from the world is crucial for developing an effective and efficient public policy. The ability that the MJB health team researchers have in searching, gathering, and analyzing data, as well as their positioning in international forums, enable us to rapidly obtain the information, process it, and make it accessible to decision makers in the government, all with the objective of bettering the lives of people through data-based policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Michal. That was excellent. We'll now move to the third part, where I and then Michael will talk about how we help share Israel's successes and lessons with other countries. I'll focus on the role of journal articles. One of the most effective ways for Israel to share Israel's successes with the world is through articles in scholarly peer-reviewed journals. In the field of health, we're fortunate that Israel has a scholarly journal that's dedicated to doing just that, the Israel Journal of Health Policy Research. This fortunate circumstance did not arise by chance. We at MJB were key partners in founding that journal and making it sure that it developed with a JDC-MJB approach, being Israel-centered but global in reach, focusing on studies that are simultaneously rigorous and applied, and highlighting recommendations that are actionable and at the same time data-driven. When Israel emerged as a world leader in vaccine rollout last December, we immediately realized that other countries could learn from this success. Within a week, we wrote up Israel's experience, and within a month, we had it published. That write-up generated immense international interest. In fact, in 2021, that article was among the most accessed and most cited social science articles related to the pandemic. Michael and I and additional colleagues then followed up that initial article with an analysis of how Israel is addressing vaccine hesitancy. As this is an issue facing all countries, that second article is also generating intense and continued international interest. I'll now turn it over to Michael to talk about another way in which we're sharing Israel's success with the world.
Thank you, Bruce. We have taken a lot of time over recent months to conduct expert briefings together with federations across the US and also with universities. These expert briefings or roundtables or professional discussions have been COVID-centered. We spent time discussing Israel's vaccine rollout. We spent time discussing issues of vaccine hesitancy, populations where we've seen less vaccine uptake and, as I said, more hesitancy from the different communities and tools that have been used to try to overcome vaccine hesitancy. We compared and contrasted responses in cities and communities across the US with those that we experienced here in Israel. We spent a lot of time thinking about lessons learned in Israel and in the US, looking at what went well, what didn't go as well, and what the next steps could be. And also how we could use this series of events through COVID to develop partnerships and to develop continued channels of communication looking to the future. So in this series of briefings and roundtables, we spoke to UJA New York's healthcare division, who also brought in the president of Mount Sinai Hospital. And that was a session that was chaired by Jodi. We had a conversation with the LA Federation Health Professionals Network. We spent time with the Ann Arbor Federation and their Maimonides Society of Healthcare Professionals. And in fact, the next meeting in this series will happen this coming Sunday, when Bruce will be meeting with the Federation of Columbia, South Carolina at their request. So this is another way for us to connect with Jewish communities across North America and to connect specifically with the healthcare professionals within the community. It's not only in the US, and Bruce has also held a meeting together with infectious disease experts in the UK And it's not only with Jewish communities. We are also engaging in a series of meetings with Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, with the School of Medicine and with the School of Applied Social Science, and also are planning an additional roundtable together with the Cleveland Federation and the Myers Foundation. So we have been using online platforms and meetings and Zoom to facilitate the exchange of ideas and to help build relationships. Jewish communities across America are also dealing with coronavirus. These types of conversations help the communities and the federations engage their professionals in the work of the federation around their own areas of expertise and their own areas of interest. And ultimately, it's all about building relationships around the world. So we're helping to share the Israeli experience and expertise abroad. We're also helping to bring the global experience to Israel. And we hope to achieve, in addition to this, greater exposure of the Institute and of JDC within the Jewish world on current, topical, key issues. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, back to Jodi, I think.
Yes, terrific. So I had a couple of questions, and you can either raise your hand or put them in the chat. I can't see everybody because I'm on a iPad, so if you have a question, speak up. But the first question I got were, I chuckled a little, which is how open are Israelis to ideas from experts and policymakers in other countries? We Jews are a little stubborn sometimes, so it's an important question, I guess, to at least understand.
So I'll be happy to take that one. Israelis are amazingly open to ideas from other countries, much more so, for example, than policymakers in Washington, D.C. And Sherry and I have talked about this often. In Israel is an understanding we're a small country. We can't do it all on our own. We need to learn from other countries. That doesn't mean that we'll copy paste things. We know that we're different. Everybody's different. But you got to take the idea, the relevant, you got to pick the ideas that are most relevant. And then even then you have to tweak them. And even if, going back to my previous example, even if you're in Virginia, there's something good happening in North Carolina, you can't just copy paste it. You're still different. You have to adapt it. Of course, more so between countries. But it is amazing. Israelis love contact with other countries, particularly because we're a small country and our relations with our neighbors are not always that great. They love to travel. They did their fellowships abroad. They love having guests from other countries. We are a very internationally minded country, and it's such a great fit for JDC, which is, of course, also an international organization.
Wonderful. If nobody else has a question, I'd love to.
I think Sherry wants to comment on that.
Sherry.
I would say also the other piece of this is that Israelis will push back on you. Of course, they will ask you, they will ask you to defend what you're saying. They will raise some important questions. I think the other thing that's really important is there are such interesting things happening in the Israeli healthcare system that have real implications for even the US healthcare system, which is much, much bigger. So I think recognizing that flow goes both ways is very gratifying to the Israeli policymakers.
Can you give an example of this interchange, what the others have learned from Israel that changed practice elsewhere, and in turn, what Israel learned from others that changed practice in Israel itself?
Okay, I'll give a couple, and maybe my colleagues will want to add to that. So in Israel, we used to pay for all hip fracture hospitals that did hip fractures would get paid the same amount, no matter how old the person was or if they had complicating conditions. And our researchers saw that in the US and the UK, they had already gone beyond that. And they were making adjustments for that, which was important both for quality of care and for efficiency. So that's an idea that we took from another country. I'll give one more example in that range. Israel has a shortage of physicians in its periphery, in the Negev and the Galilee, and put into place various financial incentives to get more young physicians to move there. And we evaluated that. And we also have bring in some insight from other countries that also deal with this issue of these geographic distribution. That is that financial incentives can be great, but you can't do that alone. And it's also very important, for example, to get more medical students from those underserved areas. So that's things that Israel has learned. I'd say on the vaccination, I think we've helped other countries understand that ways to reach out to minority populations and to understand their vaccine hesitancy and to work with the community leaders. I think we've been very helpful with that. I think in terms of the initial rollout, we helped the world understand that it's going to work a lot faster getting people vaccinated if the criteria for who gets vaccinated first aren't so complicated that you need to be a PhD to understand it. So the many lessons flowing in both directions.
Terrific. Other questions? So somebody wanted you to address, Bruce, whether you've encountered...
Sorry, Jodi, I just saw that Claudio was raising his hand as well. You said that maybe
Claudio, go ahead. Go ahead, you go first.
Give us an insight of what do you talk in order to predict the pandemic as we know it right now. There has been great amount of lack of investments in vaccines and resistant antibiotics. And those are things that the lack of investments, the lack of economic incentivized medical policy could have raised their hand and say, we are creating this enormous risk. Maybe you can give us an insight of the discourse that existed before and the discourse that exists today.
Michael, could I ask you as our resident public health expert to handle that one?
You know, I honestly, I'm not sure that that's part of the discourse as it is, you know, that's currently, that we're currently hearing. Maybe I can put it into a wider perspective about where in Israel, we definitely could have done a better job. Israel, for many, many years, had a world-class public health preventive medicine system. We were the envy of the world, and people would come to Israel to look at public health preventive medicine. And I would say that probably 10 or 15 years ago, we were probably in an excellent place to deal with a pandemic at the population-wide level, because as a country, we invested in equitable healthcare, we invested in preventive medicine, we invested in universal care. And that eroded over many, many years, sometimes gradually and sometimes violently. We currently have a very weak, very disorganized public health system. And that is a terrible tragedy because from a place where we were positioned to do even better with population protection, we did okay, but we started from a lower point than we would have started if the pandemic had broken out 15 or 20 years ago. And I think, Claudio, that issues about investment in prevention had been put in the margins for many, many years in favor of more immediate, more high-tech, more hospital-based, more cutting technology investments and programs. And it seems to be that the current conversation is about resetting the balance on therapeutic medicine versus preventive healthcare. There's a slow but sure engagement of healthcare professionals across the spectrum to say maybe we need to reconsider investing in basic principles of universal care like well baby care and childhood vaccination, early identification and diagnosis of childhood disabilities, prevention of overweight and diabetes, smoking prevention. You know, it's the bread and butter of public health and of preventive medicine. So I don't think we've heard a lot specifically about, you know, antibiotic resistance or about investment in vaccines right now, because COVID has really taken over most of the headlines and the attention in the discourse on medicine. But from behind the scenes, it looks like there's more organization now towards a greater discussion of going back to the good old days of a stronger, more equitable healthcare system based more on preventive medicine.
Michael, I just want to add, Claudio, I think it was a great question, and I encourage you to be in touch with us after this conversation so we can explore it further.
Thank you. I was thinking, Bruce, when you talked about the openness in other places to hearing opinion from in Israel, I was wondering if you'd run into any anti-Semitism or BDS on the other side, recognizing what it's like on some of the university campuses right now in the United States in particular, Europe, obviously.
Michal, could you take on that question, please?
Yes. Well, can you hear me? Yes. I'm happy to say that we didn't encounter a hostile attitude toward Israel. On the contrary, the attitude is very professional. Ruth Weisberg is receiving a great appreciation from the observatory colleagues. And even when we preach, when we turn to other professionals, in a certain forum, sometimes the question is raised whether we send vaccinations for the Palestinian population and ask questions like these. But all in all, if I may say, the focus is on the health system and on professional issues, and it is a good feeling that we didn't come across any hostile.
Michal, that's great. I want to see if Sherry or Gary or any of our other health committee members on this call have anything to share about that when they bring visitors from Israel to their campuses. Stuart, Fiona, have you had any experiences on this about Israel reactions around health?
Not around health per se. If there's something that comes with health, it usually comes into the medical campus or public health school. I think it could be different on the undergraduate campus, but that's not, where we've brought people in at this point.
Sherry, what's been your experience?
I think that the anti-Semitism and BES is very much concentrated in some parts of the university. It's not really across the university. And the parts of the university that we engage with, which really are about, policy making on things like health policy, public health, medicine, so on, those are not the areas that where this movement has had a lot of purchase. People are not that engaged by this. I will say we do definitely, if we have Israeli visitors, people will ask questions like, as Michal said, what's happening with vaccination delivery to people in the occupied territories. But that's not really so much of it doesn't come across as a particularly threatening kind of question.
Okay, what about our colleagues from the UK, Fiona or Raphael? Can either of you comment on this?
Yes, I would. I think hopefully not a huge problem, but certainly was a problem, particularly last May, when there was conflict in the Middle East, in Israel in particular. A number of our medical schools, the deans had to write out to all the students and all the staff, asking them to not behave in ways which would be viewed as anti-Semitic, which is really sad because that's not something that happens commonly, to ask them not to be racist. We also had a number of colleagues, medical colleagues, junior and senior, who had a lot of very unfortunate communication on social media, simply because they were Jewish.
Wow.
Particularly during that period. And we actually ended up reporting a number of our colleagues, our non-Jewish colleagues, unfortunately, to the General Medical Council because of that behavior. So it was really quite worrying at the time, a lot of very distressed people. As I say, hopefully not a commonly held view of anti-Semitism, but enough to cause quite a lot of...
I just want to add that I feel that our international cooperations are very helpful for Israel. If I and Fiona show up on a podium together to a general audience and we're showing professional exchange, I think it helps everybody appreciate the importance of the professional element there. Jodi, back to you.
Yeah, no, I was also going to say that it's a real opportunity, in my view, for non-Jews to see Israel through the light of its excellent system, its open-minded medical profession and government, and it's just a good look at the exchange. Actually helps on these areas of BDS and anti-Semitism to the extent that people might otherwise have a narrow view of Israel. And meeting Israelis always helps. So I think that you're performing a very valuable service. I'm gonna just survey to see if folks have other questions. I think. Keri, I think
raising his hand. Ted Comet is raising his hand.
Go ahead, Ted.
Going back to your point about the delivery of services, I understand there's been a problem with the private places like Shaare Zedek and Hadassah versus the others that are sort of government funded. Is this an issue that you would address in Brookdale?
Definitely. The challenges faced by the different types of hospitals are really quite big. They face also common challenges, but one of the things that's good about Michal and her team is we're seen as honest brokers. We're not part of either a specific health plan or the government or the hospitals. And oftentimes we can play a role, sometimes on our own, sometimes with our international experts in sorting through some of those issues, which are making sure that the playing field is fair and equal. And we're very happy to do so.
Other questions? If not, Keri, I think it is your mic.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd just like to take a moment to really place an additional emphasis on the human aspect of the professional networking that we do with our colleagues abroad. JDC often emphasizes human interest stories about the end-of-line beneficiaries of programs. The story that we're telling here is people-centered in another way. It's about how cultivating relationships between colleagues, trust, mutual respect, the human connection allow us to learn from one another, to give to one another, to ask for help. And as we've seen, people have been isolated during this pandemic, and yet the global community is closer than ever through virtual platforms. The need for this connection has never been more acute than it is in times of crisis. And here it relates to the Jewish value of alvut hadadit, mutual help and solidarity, which is one of the values that we talk about in JDC. Throughout history, the Jewish people have often felt isolated, cut off, excluded by the nations. And here we've heard stories today about connections with international colleagues. Some are Jews and many are not. And it's about the willingness to take the time to provide help, to consult, to share knowledge and expertise, and also the humility to ask for help and the openness to receive it. And I think it's important to spotlight the relationships and trust that the Institute has fostered and continues to foster over nearly 50 years, that these are a most valuable asset to the government of Israel and to the people of Israel. This is bringing rich knowledge and experience from the world to improve the health and well-being of people. It's about connecting with others to better the lives of all Israelis. So thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Now, Michael, could you unmute and you can close
sure.
it. Thank you.
Okay. So what we heard today was some examples of how we utilize cross-national exchange in health policy. To be sure, we do this across the Institute. Some examples of this can be through the work that we did in a series of rapid response studies during the initial stages of the pandemic. And we use this type of cross-national exchange to quickly assess the situation regarding domestic violence, care for the elderly, the needs of special education, household debt and finance, and many, many more examples that you can see on our website as well. And it was through these types of quick roundtable sharing of information, tapping into a network of professionals across the world that we were able to quickly synthesize a lot of information and to analyze it and to bring it to decision makers here in Israel as quickly as possible. I don't think that we can overstate the importance of collaboration. I think that if COVID has taught us anything, it's that no one country, no one research group, no one organization can effectively tackle societal problems alone. We need cross-pollination, we need collaboration, we need conversation, we need an exchange, and it can work in both directions. We have lessons learned, we have positive experiences and information gained that we can share and that we can learn. And I also want to say that we need to be equally as open to sharing our failures in places where we didn't do as well. We certainly want to hear that about other countries, other communities that can share what they did wrong so that we can try not to recreate that scenario. And we're just as open to sharing things that we could have done better in Israel that didn't work as well. There's a lot of humility involved. This time around in COVID, Israel had some positive experiences to share, but there were other things that didn't go as well. And as the wheel turns, it's important both to share and to listen. This has been a very important experience for us during COVID, and I can report that I think we view cross-national exchange and collaboration as a value. It's not only a research tool. I think that we actively seek out this type of collaboration, and these last 2 years have been very helpful in driving that lesson home. And I can confidently say that that is something that everyone here at Brookdale appreciates and actively tries to seek out in the work that they do. I want to express my deepest and most heartfelt appreciation to the members of our health advisory team, Gary and Sherry and Stuart and Raphael, Fiona. You're an amazing group of people, of professionals. You single-handedly help us deliver the tremendous impact that we have on the Israeli healthcare system directly. And there's no additional measures that are needed to see the immediate impact that you have directly on decision makers and on policy here in Israel. You're not only an invaluable resource to us and to the people of Israel, but on a personal note, I want to say that you're also a source of inspiration to us. We're tremendously blessed that we have you as individuals and as a group, and the work that you do together with us and the mentoring that you provide to our team members here are just incredible and invaluable. So again, thank you very much for everything that you do. And we're really looking forward to a time when we can meet again in person and come back and cement this very, very strong relationship. I also want to thank all the speakers today, and especially Bruce and Michal for putting together a really great session. And to everyone, just to remind you that we're always open to exchange and to collaboration. You heard how federations in New York and LA and Cleveland and Ann Arbor and South Carolina have been important hubs for us to connect with colleagues. And if you have any ideas, please be in touch with us. Please be in touch with Keri. We're always looking for additional opportunities, and we'd love to engage with your communities as well. So thank you very much. And Jodi, back to you.
Thank you. Max had a quick question. If you have a moment, Michael, to answer it for the group, and then I would just echo my thanks to everyone.
Sure.
Go ahead, Max. Just take off mute.
Sure. I'm just curious, given new things like the bird flu hitting Israel, I wanted to know what you thought if we weren't dealing with being reactive and you could be proactive, like what would you do? What would you attack and go after? What would be your first priorities?
As far as epidemics, I'm not sure that I understood exactly. Maybe you can help me.
Just in general health policy, like if you didn't have to be dealing with a pandemic, what would you guys be dealing with?
So, we're firm believers in the power of universal care, and we believe that making small and incremental changes for large populations will always have a greater impact than large steps for smaller populations. So I think that whenever there's a question about what should we be doing next, I think that it's never a mistake to go back and look at the basics, and to go back and look at access to care, to look at disparities, to look at equity, to look at life expectancy, to look at health promotion, to look at smoking cessation, overweight, diabetes, road traffic accidents. These are the bread and butter of the health of communities and of populations. In Israel, we have more work to do on this. We have work to do on our geographic disparities. And Bruce mentioned that living in the center of Israel and living in the margins, the geographic margins of Israel, is really living two different healthcare systems. And also across populations, looking at the disparities between the Arab and the Jewish populations, and looking at specific needs of populations like the Haredi population. These are probably the basic tenets of good and strong public health. And those would be my personal recommendations about where we should be focusing.
Well, that's a lot of work. Thank you very much, Michael, and to you and to all the team at MJB and to our health policy advisors. Thank you for participating and for all that you do to make the world a better place, not just Israel, but the world. We really appreciate it. We're very proud to be associated with you, and I wish everybody a successful and healthy week and look forward to seeing you all soon in person. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone. Stay well.
Thank you. It was terrific.
Good, thanks.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I learned so much today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right.